In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear brakes on this Ford F-150. We are working with the early half of this generation, so 09 to 2011, 2012 to 14 takes different brakes, so make sure you have the right ones for your year truck. Having said that, if you need these or any other parts, check us out at oneauto.com. Let's get started. Use your 21mm socket, remove all 6 of your lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. Use a 10mm wrench or socket, break free this slider pin bolt. With this one broken free, let's move to the top one. Break this free now while the caliper is still securely mounted. This one has a vibration damper attached to it, which actually will help because it gives us something to grab onto. So remove this completely. We'll set it aside. Pull this back, leave it right here. Remove the bottom one the rest of the way. You can take this one out completely because it has enough space. With the help of a pry bar, let's pry this caliper piston in a little bit, just like this. Not all the way, just enough to get this caliper off of here. When you pry this off, pry from the bottom. This pad is stuck, so it's going to have to unseize. Basically, both pads need to swing up and out in order for this caliper to come out of here. There we go, just like that. Now you can swing it, unhook it from the top, and there we go. You can flip it over. We'll pull this bolt slider pin out and then set this up on the leaf spring. Basically what you're aiming for is to not put any pressure on this brake hose, so don't just let it dangle. Let's remove the pads. On the inner one, you can just pull straight out. It should pop out. It's clipped in with these little hooks. And then to remove this pad, the outer one, you can either pry on this. However, sometimes this is difficult because you're basically prying up against yourself. So what I'm going to do is flip this over, and I'm just going to use a hammer, tap on these 2 ears, and it'll slide the pad straight out. There we go. Set this aside. Now let's take off the rotor. Usually you can just wiggle it back and forth. If it does not let you pull it off, either it's seized onto the hub surface of the axle or the parking brake shoes are grabbing it and don't let you pull it off. If you think it's seized onto the hub, you can use these 2 bolt holes and stick 2 bolts through, pull this away. If you think it's the parking brake shoes, I will show you in a second where you can contract them, de-adjust them so you can have them release the brake rotor. For me, it comes right off as it should. If you have to clean up this hub, use a wire brush, scrape it. Mine is not too bad of condition. I'm just going to scrape off some of the old grease or anti-seize, whatever this is, but it's hardened at this point. Just going to do this, and a little bit of brake parts cleaner at the end. Then we can recoat it so that it doesn't rust in the future and the rotor doesn't seize on. That's the main reason for this. If yours is rotted and you have to sand it down, be very careful when you do that because you don't want to remove so much material that you damage the surface. You still want the rotor to sit flush. Rinse it off. Dry it off. And now, let's put a thin coating of anti-seize. I'm using the spray kind, so I'm going to make sure I don't spray it all over the parking brake shoes. If you're using the brushed kind, that's actually better in this case because it's a more controlled application. Try to avoid getting it on the lug studs, mainly on the hub surface of the axle. Take a pry bar, pop these shims off. There we go. And do the same to the top one. Sometimes they're a little rusty here, that's why it's important to clean this up very well. However, when you clean it, don't sand too much. If you sand too much, you need a new backing plate, because this is not just the caliper bracket or, well, the area where the pads slide, but it's also the backing plate. So if you sand too much, you remove too much material, now those shims are floating, not good. So you just want to clean it up lightly. I'm going to start with a wire brush. If that is not enough, then I will very gently sand or use a file, but you don't want to just grind it down. I'm going to wet this down with some brake parts cleaner to prevent the dust. Okay, if I hammer it down, it'll go down. It looks like I do have to sand just a little bit. So I'm going to grab a very fine, worn sanding disc and just clean up the outer part of it, just a little skim, and that should be good. I'm happy with this. Let's put some grease on so that it hopefully slows the rust down a little bit. It's all right if you put too much, it'll just squeeze out, and then you can wipe it off. Now, put this new shim on, tap it down. That's perfect. Let's do the same to the top one. Now let's put the rotor on. I like to start by putting it on backwards just so the axle can hold it for me while I clean it. It's important to degrease this surface. I'm going to use brake parts cleaner on the inside too, where the brake shoes ride, and wipe it down. Now this one particularly does not have an oil coating, has a different special coating to prevent rust. However, there are rotors that have Cosmoline oil from the factory to prevent them from rusting while they're on the shelf. Those you absolutely have to clean off, otherwise you get oil all over your brake pads. Slide it down all the way, clean this side. Now before we continue with the brake job, you want to pull these slider pins out. Hopefully yours are not seized. If they are seized, you're going to want to spray some rust penetrant in there, work them back and forth, get them out of here, and make sure they're in good condition. This one's great. Check the boots, make sure they're not ripped. These boots are okay, so I'm good to go on this side. Looks like same story over here. Pull the pin out, check the boot. Boot seems fine, so let's clean these off. I'm going to add some grease and then we'll continue. Looking inside, the boots are pretty clean, so I'm just going to add some grease in here. In this accordion part, it will act as a reserve of grease basically. I'm going to put this into both ends. Try to avoid sticking it right in the middle. In the middle, it's actually a very tight clearance between the pin and the boot. So if you put grease here, it'll just get pushed straight out as the pin goes in. It has to be in the little folds, basically. That's where it'll sit. And we'll do the same to the other boot. Add some in there. And the other side. Now you want to take your pins. You can put a little bit of grease on them. Make sure these ends are clean. You can wire brush them if needed. That's what seals up right up against the boots. Sometimes once it gets slippery from the grease, it's a little difficult to get them to slide through, but doable. Push it in, make sure that boot sits right there on the end of it, and over here as well. There we go. Any excess grease will come out. Let's do the same to this one. Put that grease back in there. Make sure that slides smoothly. Push it through. All right. Work it back and forth a little. That is nice and smooth, no problems. So let's continue. Now if you want to, you can open up your bleeder screw. It's a 10mm size. It's obviously easier to do this when the caliper is still mounted. There we go. At this point, some fluid should come out. Then take your caliper piston depressor and push that caliper piston in. All the way in. Perfect, that's bottomed out. Remove this. Close up that bleeder screw. Just make it snug for now. We'll come back to it in a minute after the brake caliper is on. I'm going to leave that boot off so I can remember to do that. At this point, let's grab the new pads. Inspect this surface, however. Make sure it's in good condition. This one's fine. Just a bunch of brake dust and some surface rust, but that's all right. This is what the inner pad looks like. It has the 3 tabs that'll lock into the inside of the piston. Sometimes these are a little tricky to get in. You have to line it up and press it in. There we go. So that's locked in. The outer pad hooks on with these 2 tabs, just like so. It should slide on. Okay, make sure that's flush right here. It's pushed in all the way. Before you install the caliper, put the top bolt in because there won't be enough clearance with the leaf spring. Now, as you slide the caliper on, notice how the outer pad has 2 hooks at the top here. The inner does not, so that doesn't really matter. But at the bottom, the outer one has a spring that has to seat it down all the way, just like that. If it doesn't go on, make sure you're not crushing the boots and the slider pins here. Start these 2 bolts in. That one's snug. Get this one started. I cannot torque this top one just because of, well, this, so I'm going to take a wrench to it, make sure it's tight. I will come back and torque this one though. 22 foot-pounds is the torque for both of these. There's one. On this damper on the backside, if you pop the cap open, you can see that you can fit a T30 socket. However, the clearance between this and the leaf spring is preventing me from putting a torque wrench on here. So even with this, I still can't torque it. So what I'm going to do is close this up. The torque for these is not high enough to where I can't properly tighten it up with a wrench. So I'm just going to give it the best I can with the wrench, and there you have it. That's tight. If you doubt it, you can always put thread locker on the end of these bolts, but it's not absolutely necessary. Now with the caliper securely mounted, let's break open this bleeder screw again. Make sure there's no air in the system. Yep, I see clean, fresh fluid coming out. I'm going to close it up. If you wanted to, you could do a manual brake bleed at this point since you did have the bleeder screw open. And now with it closed, I'm just going to clean everything up with a brake parts cleaner. Doing this will ensure that I don't confuse the residual fluid for a potential leak in the future. It's important that you know if you do have a brake fluid leak. Cap off the bleeder screw. Hopefully you still have your cap. This usually prevents it from getting clogged up and rusty. And there you have it. Do the same to the other side. Let's get the wheel on. Put on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 150 foot-pounds and a cross pattern. $150 in a cross pattern. Here we go. Double check them if you want. If not, take it for a road test. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If it was helpful, don't forget to leave a like. If you have anything to say, leave it in the comment section below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you can stay up to date with all of our latest content. Thanks for watching.